Hi, I'm Michael French, audio engineer here at Church of the Highlands. Today we're going to go over the Yamaha CL5. We're going to go over a basic overview, so when you step behind the console for your first time, you're going to know where to start and what to look for. So let's get started. When you first step behind the console, you're going to want to just take a look at everything and see where things are landing. So if you look at the console, on the left side here, you have your inputs. In the middle, you have your outputs. And on the right side, you also have more inputs. So let's just start with the left side. If you select the top, this is gonna give you all your channels. They're labeled 1 through 16, all the way down to 72 channels that you have available as inputs. And you can select those various inputs by scrolling through these menus, and they will pop up on the screens here. So you see that, but also you have your reverbs, all of your effects, they're also here as well. And they're under the STN button. And then you can also spill your DCAs to here, okay? But the way we have it set up at your campus is going to be mainly for inputs only on this left side, and that will be under the custom A1 button. Okay, and that allows us to take whatever we want inside the inputs and populate them to the top layer here. Custom A2 is your second layer, and that's going to get you to, say, your MDs or your clicks, or maybe your video channels, CD channels, things like that. So when you operate, you're mainly going to operate in custom A1 and custom A2 on your left side. And then we're going to move to the middle section. This is your output section. This can be inputs or outputs, depending on how you have it selected. So if you see the button here at the top, if you select inputs, this is going to give you your 1 through 72 inputs, just as this side did. But we're going to keep it selected on the output. We're going to keep it on output, and we're going to keep it on DCA, because this is going to give us our DCAs so we can control everything happening under 3 or 4 faders. So we can control the whole band with one fader. Okay, that allows us to be way more efficient, and it helps us during flow moments. So anytime there's a transition, you're mainly going to operate in this section, your DCA section. And we'll scroll through so you can see the console allows you to have up to 16 DCAs, but at the moment we're only using 8 of them. So these are not even being used. If you flip down, we're on our mixes now. And this is where you will see, your drum in-ear mixes, maybe your reverbs, anything that's on an auxiliary. The auxiliary master volume will land right here on your mixes. And you can scroll through these. It has 24 different mixes. And then we'll go to our matrices. This is where we will take things and pile them together and then send them out to places, such as our left-right, so our PA. Backstage, this is at some campuses set up for maybe a prayer room or something like that, so they can get audio in a prayer room. And then our lobby feed may be on here as well. Okay, if you hit stereo, that's basically just going to take your stereo bus and populate it to right here. So you have your left, right, and mono. Then you have your Q bus, and then also your monitor. And it just depends, it could be different depending on where you're at, but it will look very similar to this. And then this is going to be your verbs and effects, things like that. It's labeled STN as well, just like it is on this side. So if you click both of these, you have the same thing in 2 places. So that's why we kind of stay in one section, custom A1 here, and then over here we'll stay in our DCA section. Custom B is probably not set up because we don't really use it. We'll just stay in the DCA section for this. And on the right side, you're going to see this is our inputs. And you see here that we have it in custom mode. We've taken our vocal mic inputs from here and we've moved them over to the top layer here. That way we can have access to everything happening at one time. So this allows us to have control of everything happening during a worship service at one time. So we're using custom layers. And we're not even using any of these other custom layers on this side. They could be set up however anyone would want to set them up. But for us, we found that this is probably the best way to use this section. And we also have our handheld microphone This is what your pastor will come up on the stage with. And it's landing right here on the right side as well. And it goes back over to this DCA here in the middle. And as a rule of thumb, we always leave this fader up because the pastor will control the power to the microphone, so they'll turn it on and off. So when they turn it on and talk into it, we want them to be able to be heard. So we'll leave that up. And then at times, you may have all of these down and video up. If you're on a video, it will look something like this. But when the band's playing, it will look very similar to this. So now let's dive into a little more detail and see what is actually happening on each individual channel. So let's take the kick, for example, and we're going to select it. You're probably going to want to know, hey, what's this knob up here on the top of the channel? And that is an assignable knob that you can use it for a couple of different purposes. So as you see here, this is going to tell you what the knob is actually doing. So right now selected is gain. So if I want to gain the kick up, I can use the knob here, or I can use the knob here. If I want to use it as a pan, I can pan my kick to the left side or right side or up the middle, And I can also do the same thing here. The third option is assign. That's user assign. You can assign this to be something, say if you wanted it to be a reverb send or something, just different, you could assign that knob to be that. So it gives you a little flexibility with that knob there. At the moment, I don't think this is actually being used, the user assign, and normally I just leave it on gain. You're moving down, you have the select button, and that just selects your channel. If you want to edit that channel, you have to have it selected. And the button below that is your Q button. That allows you to solo this individual channel to your headphones, okay? So if you want to hear what the acoustic player is doing, hit the Q button and it'll go to your headphones. And the last button is the on-off button. Now this is a little backwards for some consoles. Some consoles, if the button is lit, it is actually muted. This console is backwards. If the button is lit, the channel is unmuted and it's on. So just be sure you know that. It has to be lit and on for the channel to come through your PA. And then below that, you have your screen, your color. It kind of helps you associate where you're at. And then your fader. So yeah, that's a basic overview of each individual fader and channel strip. We'll move over to our output section. It's very, very similar. These knobs are assigned by things that you have selected on the screen though. So for instance, if I want to use these knobs, I can go to my acoustic channel, pull up my EQ, and here I can use these knobs to EQ, or I can use these knobs, but we'll get into that in a minute. That's what these knobs do. The select knob is a little different on, select button is a little different on the output section. If you hit the select, it's going to spill whatever is under this DCA to your left side. So it's going to take our vocal effects and it's going to put them right here. The same thing with band. If I hit select on the band, it's going to take everything in this DCA and put it right here. It's kind of useful if you're not familiar with what is in a DCA. You can hit the button and it will populate. So if I'm wondering, what's under my CD DCA, click it. My CD's in there, and it looks like there's an aux cord somewhere that is not in use. It's actually in that DCA as well. And we'll move to the right. This is your monitor level. This is going to adjust your headphone volume. There's a couple ways to do this. There's one here, and then there's also one under the console that you really can't get to. So they both do the same thing, but this is a really easy one to reach, and this is my favorite one to use. And then the user-defined keys. You may use this section some, depending on how it's actually set up. This is 16 buttons that you can basically program to do whatever you want them to do. For instance, if I wanted to have a tap delay, I could program button number 16 to be a tap delay. and depending on where you're at, they will be programmed differently. Most of the time, they're programmed to take you into different in-ear mixes or take you into your sends on fader, you know, and it will be laid out very similar to this. Most of the time, that's how it's set up. So it's case by case though with these. You just kind of have to figure out what the button's doing, which can sometimes be a little scary, but they're not going to do anything that could be detrimental really to your service. So the most common use is the tap delay, and that's mainly the only reason I use this section. Moving to the right, this is exactly like this section over here, identical. So we won't jump into that again. And then to the right a little more, you notice there's two more faders here. This is basically your stereo bus, and it's pretty much just there. It's same select, cue, and mute buttons, and it's got a fader. Normally I don't touch it though. I just leave it at 0 and let it do its thing. It's the last thing that everything hits before it goes out to the PA, so the volume of everything goes through this fader. So if I turn the fader up, everything's going to get louder. If I turn it down, everything's going to get quieter. So I normally just leave it at 0 and make my adjustments in the DCA section. All right, so the next thing we're going to hit is the aux section right here on the actual console. At the top of the aux section, you have two buttons. That's the selector that basically lets you page over to the next set of auxes and matrices. So if we hit this button, it's going to take us to the next page, and this is the first page. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Here you will see all of your auxes, you know, drum mix, click, intermix, miscellaneous, my keys intermix. Over here you have your drum reverb, band reverb, and your left-right matrix and lobby feed. So this is just another representation of the outputs of your console. All right, so now we're going to move over to the right side of the screen to our user-defined knobs on the right side. These can be set up a lot of different ways, but they're probably set up to just change the brightness of your screen and things like that. So you just give it a little turn, you'll see brightness of the panel. You can see the brightness go up and down, the brightness of the name, and this is set up to be an input delay for some reason, and we're not going to use that. So, and the lamp, there's normally lamps hanging over, and this will change the brightness of that. But they're all user defined, and you can change them to be what you want them to be, but generally they're set up to change brightness. So the last section we're going to cover is scene memory. This is going to allow you to store or recall your shows. And this increase and decrease basically just tabs up, and it's demonstrated on the bottom right of your screen. Recall is simply recalling that show. Storing is simply storing that show. You can click on that and it will come to the actual screen, and you can see that I don't have anything else stored. It's just this one show. So for example, let's just store another show, and let's turn these faders down. We'll store it like this. The preview button, we'll demonstrate that now, is a non-destructive kind of preview of what is happening in the scene you're about to recall. So if you're not sure what things are going to happen, you can hit preview mode and then scroll up, recall it, and it will recall. It shows you that, you know, this is where your faders are at, and you can hit preview and it will go back to the way it was. It's pretty helpful if you want to see the scene you're about to recall before you actually recall it. So that's how that is used. And the main reason you would want to use that is if you're using this section to actually do snapshots for individual songs. So say, you know, we're in song 1, I want to, you know, store this, and then I want to see what song 2 looks like. I preview it and I see that vocal 2 moves up. I can say, okay, yes, it is in the scene that, you know, vocal 2 is leading the song, and I would recall it. If, you know, it did something crazy, I would say, okay, I don't want to recall that scene. So that's basically what preview button does for you. I think that's pretty much it for everything on the actual surface. Let's go ahead and dive into more details on the actual screen and each individual channel. We're going to click the bass channel, and as you can tell here, we're on this overview screen, and nothing really happened when we click the bass channel. You're going to click select, and then you're going to hit any of these knobs on the left side. We're going to hit the EQ knob, and it will take us to the channel overview screen. And here, you see everything happening on this particular channel. So you see, you have your gain, your compressors and gates, your EQ, representation of what DCA is in. So you can see that this bass is in DCA2. You can see that it is sent to the intermix via direct out, and you'll probably learn more about that in the near future, how we route things to the in-ears. We'll go over it briefly here, but not in too much detail. And then you see a little representation of where this may be sent in an auxiliary mix. So let's dive in. Let's go ahead and click on the gain. This is the first thing that is going to affect this channel as it comes off the stage. So we're going to have our gain here. This is going to give us more or less volume, essentially, or signal for this bass guitar. So you'll find yourself using the gain knob a good bit, depending on how much signal the bass player or any other instrument is sending you. So there's your gain, and we can close it. You just hit the X, and then we'll also go to dynamics. These are direct representation of what's happening in the dynamics section here. So we'll click dynamic 1. As you can see, it's set up as a gate. Okay, in this screen, you can control what this dynamic is doing. You can make it become a duct, or you can make it become a compressor or an expander. But for now, it's set up as a gate, and it's actually not on. So we'll leave it off, but your on button is right here, and that's how you would get to that. You can see that dynamic 2 is on, so let's go ahead and get to that. Instead of clicking it on the screen though, we're going to click on the button. It does the same thing. And this is turned into a compressor, and it's on, as you can see. So all of the knobs and controls will populate to the knobs here on the console. So I can take my threshold, my ratio, different things, my attack, release, output gain, and knee, and adjust it with actual knobs on the console, which is pretty nice. And now we're going to move down to the EQ section. You'll probably find yourself in the EQ section the most out of anything else. So let's jump into it. To get to it, we'll just click the EQ on the screen, and it'll bring it up. You can control it with the EQ knobs here on the left, or depending on what you have selected, you can control it with the bottom knobs here. And if I want to use different EQ bands, I can adjust them and click them here, move them around, gain up, gain down, adjust my Q right here, and it's pretty amazing what it can do. Most of the time, I actually use the ones on the left side just because they're the same every time. So, but you will find your own way to do it, and there's no right or wrong way. It just there's a couple of different ways. So, and now let's go into a little more detail. Let's jump into a drum. Let's use the kick drum as an example, and everything applies the same as it was on the bass, except for the kick drum is routed differently to the in-ear mix. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that the bass is using a direct out. What that means is the bass is going from this channel directly to one channel of an Aviom. Now, drums, for instance, you want to send a whole drum mix to the Aviom. You don't want everyone to have to create their own drum mix. So to do that, we use an auxiliary. So you may find yourself in a situation where someone's like, hey, can I get the snare drum up in my in-ear mix? And you need to know how to accommodate that. So we'll click the snare drum, and as you can see on the left side, this is our auxiliaries. The top one is labeled drum in-ear mix, IEM. And if we click on it, it brings up in more detail, and you can see the level at which each drum is going into that mix. You can adjust it here. You can send more or less volume with the actual knob that corresponds to the level, or my favorite way to do it is to go to Sends on Fader, which is right here, And this allows you to scroll through your auxiliaries and matrices and see what you're actually sending to it on the fader layer. So you can actually, it's a little more visual for me. So I like to do it this way. So simply you just click on Sends on Fader and then select the drum intermix. And as you see, everything else is down, but the drums are up. So if they want more snare, you can just give them a little more snare here, and you can exit out of it like that, and it'll take you back to your main mix. You do have to be careful with that, however, because if you're in this mix, everything, all the select knobs will be light, they will be green, okay? If all the select knobs are green, that's kind of like a warning saying, hey, you're inside of a mix, be careful with what you're doing, because if you are adjusting these faders, you're not going to hear it in the PA. It's going to be affecting someone's in-ear mix, which could be really detrimental, especially if you turn it up too loud or something like that. It could really damage their hearing. So be careful if all your select knobs are green, and get back to your normal layer and make sure you're back there before you start making any other adjustments. All right, thanks for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments or would like to see any other video, please email audio@churchofthehighlands.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.